everybody. This is Colin Podcasting about real estate, and welcome to show 14. The guest on today's show is Aundrea Newbern, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the Get Rich Education podcast. Aundrea spent most of her career in the corporate world and caught the real estate bug just a few years ago in 2016. To say she hit the ground running would be a bit of an understatement, because she achieved her financial freedom number just 3 years later in 2019. Now she's got 28 units in Georgia, all self-managed, has several flips on the go, and works full-time for Keith Weinhold at the Get Rich Education podcast. So very impressive young lady, and we had a great conversation. We discussed how she worked a couple of jobs to get through college, the problems she faced when she was graduating in 2008 at the height of the Great Recession, her year studying abroad, her kind of early career in the corporate world, how she pivoted to real estate in 2016, and how she built the crews, the systems and processes for a very rapidly expanding portfolio. Being an expert in the mortgage industry, we talk about her in both judicial states like Florida and non-judicial states like Georgia, where she is. So really good chat. I really enjoyed it. I think she's got a great story to tell. She's an inspiration to a lot of young investors out there, particularly young female investors. So hope you enjoy the show. And before we get over to Aundrea, I just want to remind people that I do have a website, colininvestments.com. That's COLIN investments.com. You'll find all of our previous podcasts. You'll find a range of reports that are free to download. You'll find a bunch of videos that I put up there, and you'll find some links if you'd like to schedule a call or a consultation with me. So check that out, colininvestments.com. But that's enough of me. Let's get over and have a chat with Aundrea Newbern. Aundrea Newbern, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Doing well, Colin. Thank you for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. So thanks for joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and talk to us about your early story?
Sure. So I grew up in South Georgia, if you can't tell by the accent, right on the coast, St. Simons Island area, Brunswick, Georgia. Had a pretty normal middle class background. And as soon as I could get out of the small town, made an attempt to do that. So when I was 18, left, went to college up in Atlanta, Georgia, did my undergraduate degree there at Georgia State. Had a little bit more of a non-traditional college background, so I worked 2 jobs to try to put myself through college, had a scholarship, but all completely self-funded.
Awesome.
Yeah, and graduated at the perfect time in 2008 when the market crashed. So I couldn't find a job at the time. Unfortunately, it took me quite some time to be able to do that. And
what kind of jobs did you have in college to work through? Was it typical kind of, waitress jobs, or were you in an office, or what kind of stuff were you doing?
Good question. Yep. So it was mostly bartending, waitress jobs. That's where I could make the most money to actually pay my bills at the time. So got a lot of customer service skills during that time.
Yeah.
And then when I did get a job after graduation, I worked for, I think it was around $10 or $12 an hour as a college graduate, helping process foreclosures for law firms, because we were right in the middle of that crisis at the time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that was
Did
a lot of
you
fun.
have to deal with the people that were being foreclosed on, or was it more of an admin job, or were you on the phone to the people that were, losing their homes?
Yeah, luckily I didn't have to deal directly with the people. I think that would have made it a bit more hard and difficult to have to do. But I worked on the servicer, so the creditor side, processing it, so I didn't have to speak directly with anyone. It was mostly working with the court systems at the time.
That's cool. I have a lot of respect for people that work through college. I had to work my way through college as well, and I think it's a very useful skill to have. It teaches you a lot of humility and about the value of money and how to budget and a lot of stuff that some people don't figure out until they're, mid-20s, I guess. So it's nice to have that kind of hunger and self-reliance early on. I think it kind of stands by you when you're getting started afterwards, right?
It is, absolutely. It teaches you a lot of habit forming as well, which I don't know that I would have learned if, I'd had my parents pay for everything. So completely agree on that.
Yeah. What kind of habits do you think, what was the main benefit you got from those jobs in college and having to do that extra work that other people, didn't have to?
Yeah, I think, learning to manage time, first of all. I didn't have time to go out and party all the time, like my peers were. Learning how to kind of try to stay healthy, even though I was working, 18 hours a day sometimes.
Oh, wow.
So implementing running and things like that at the time.
Well, okay, fair enough. And then, okay, so you graduated in '08 in the eye of the foreclosure storm. Unemployment was spiking, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
uncertainty in the corporate world. And you got your
Yes.
first job in, foreclosure legal firm. So how did that, what happened afterwards? How did you do in 2009, 10, 11, 12? What kind of stuff
Yeah.
you up to?
So I stayed there until 2011, and I actually left in 2010 to move to the UK to do my MBA in finance at the University of
Yes.
Liverpool.
Mm-hmm.
So while I was there, I worked still for the same firm, just working remotely at the time, processing the foreclosures and doing the MBA full time as well. So that was the next 3 years.
That's pretty cool. I know Liverpool. I sold a lot of student houses in Liverpool actually around the time you were there, around 2012.
Interesting.
We used to sell student accommodation. There's some good deals back then. There was a big spike in foreign students going to the UK, and
Hmm.
yeah, I remember selling these nice little student apartments for about 55, 60,000 pounds, about 70, $80,000 with good rent returns. And you had just these little rooms with a bathroom and a bed and a desk, and then you had
Hmm.
communal living areas and kitchens, and they're within walking distance in university. And it's Liverpool's a real university town. And did you have a lot of fun there? I certainly enjoyed visiting it.
I did. It was a lot of fun. I think I probably didn't stay there on the weekends as much as I should have because I was jumping on a Ryanair flight for 30 pounds to go to other countries while I was there. But I did really enjoy it during my time.
Mm-hmm. So that was a year masters, and that was okay. And then you were with the same firm. Okay, that's a really cool experience. I mean, everybody should spend a year living abroad when they're a student if they can figure that out. I highly recommend it. And you're showing you don't have to have rich parents to do it. I came to San Francisco when I was 19 and New York when I was 20 in the middle of university stuff. And if you get a job while you're there, you can make it work. Or if you're with a good firm that pays for an MBA, all the better, right?
Absolutely. I didn't have that much luck that they would pay for it, but
Oh no, okay.
going to the UK at the time was a heck of a lot cheaper than doing it here in the US, and it was a little bit faster. So that was kind of the reason for that.
Nice. Okay,
Yeah.
seems like a smart plan. So you moved back then with another feather in your bow, a better qualification. Did that help you kind of speed your career along a little bit afterwards?
I'd like to say yes, but I'm not sure that's that's the answer to that. When I came back, I actually struggled to find a job because I started getting that feedback of you're overqualified. You have an MBA and we can't pay for that now.
Mm.
And I ended up getting back into. I got laid off the day I landed back in the U.S. I actually got
Oh
laid
wow.
off because foreclosures were starting to slow down somewhat, and so that firm had done massive layoffs at the time. So started the job search again, and then ended up getting a job back in the mortgage industry,
Okay.
running a compliance department for a subprime servicer at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so worked for them for about 3 years, and that was a really interesting position because I got to live in India for part of that time. Most of our operations were based out of there, and learned a lot about the mortgage industry that I didn't know before.
Okay. Wow, that's a very interesting kind of segue into real estate. I mean, did you have any interest in real estate prior to that? Did any of your, family members or, cool uncles have rentals, or was this all, did you not get the real estate bug until around that time or after that time?
I didn't get the real estate bug until around 2016. So, I just kind of kept being a steady worker bee for many, many years there. Changed jobs, went to another mortgage related company.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day, I woke up and I said, I cannot do this for another 30 years. How do people do, corporate America their whole life? And,
Yeah.
how can I make the most money to not have to do this every day? And so around 2016, started doing a lot of research, actually found Keith Weinhold's podcast, Get Rich Education, as well as Bigger Pockets and several others.
Yeah.
And started kind of digging into it and doing the research and figured out real estate was certainly the way to go to be able to build the wealth the fastest.
That's awesome. So it was, you just kind of realize you're working hard, you're not advancing particularly fast. You can kind of fast forward 10, 20 years and see things not being a whole lot different. And was it just, it has to be real estate? What brought you to real estate? Or did somebody give you a book, or were you just Googling it and you found Bigger Pockets and Keith at Get Rich Education and ran with it from there?
Yeah, more of just found it, kind of ran with it from there. I did do a lot of reading and still do. I usually read about a book a week, but um,
Okay.
once I started digging into the different types of investments out there, and I had money in the stock market. I played around in the stock market a bit, 401k,
Okay.
all that good stuff. When I
Mm-hmm.
started looking at the numbers, I realized it really would take me, my whole career to be able to be rich off of that if that ever
Yeah.
happened. And it was, extremely speculative as well.
Mm-hmm.
And started crunching numbers on real estate and realized if you mitigate your risk and play it right, then you're going to get wealthy faster and with less risk overall.
Okay. So at least you obviously took the plunge. A lot of people, listen to tons of podcasts and read loads of books, but it's getting the first rental is in my experience the hardest. That's the biggest kind of leap of faith. Getting your second, third, fourth is usually a lot easier. I mean, what
Yes.
talk us through your first deal and the kind of hurdles you had to mental and otherwise overcome to get it.
Sure. So I had no idea what I was doing, but I just decided I had to do something at the time. But it was only about 2 or 3 months after I started listening to podcasts that I bought my first rental. And it was a condo, which I don't do those anymore, really.
Okay.
It was a condo in Atlanta, Georgia. It was in
Mm-hmm.
Midtown Atlanta, right by Piedmont Park. And I bought it with a conventional owner-occupied loan, and I did
Mm-hmm.
move into it. However, at the time, I knew I was in the process of interviewing for jobs out of state at the time, and so I knew I probably wouldn't be there. But also knew it wasn't mortgage fraud if I had to leave for a job. So moved into that condo, lived there until I did find another job for about 2 or 3 months, and then I turned it into a short-term Airbnb rental, which did really, really well.
Nice.
But what I failed to do was actually look at the covenants and make sure I could do that, which I couldn't.
Uh-huh. Well,
So
yeah. HOAs usually have something to say about short-term rentals. That's
they did,
sometimes they're
yes.
okay and sometimes they're not. So what happened? Did you get a slap on the wrist then after they saw you were doing well
Yeah.
from Airbnb?
Yes, I did. I got a slap on the wrist for that, and then I pulled it off and started doing long-term rentals, which were allowed in that particular condo community, and still
Mm-hmm.
made really good money. It wasn't nearly as lucrative, but made good money off of that. And in the meantime, I had moved to Chicago for a banking consulting career,
Okay.
and kept building my portfolio, the entire time I was with that company, and bought several rentals each year. So for the next 3 years, approximately.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So how did you find these on the MLS with a realtor or what did you have how did that work? How did you find them?
Yeah, the first few were on the MLS. At the time, it wasn't quite as difficult to find good deals as it is now on the
True.
MLS.
Mm-hmm.
And I also started reaching out to a lot of the realtors in the area I was investing in here in St. Simons Island, Georgia. And so, once they started seeing I could close fast and have the liquidity and credit, they would start bringing me some of the deals before they actually even listed them. So that's how I continued getting them.
So, you mentioned you bought several rentals per year afterwards. That's quite an acceleration. I mean, how did you afford that? Were you just living a very frugal life, a mixture of living frugally and earning good money, saving lots and lots for down payments, or did you have another way of investing with lower or no money down?
Yeah, great question. I actually came up with all the money myself, a couple different ways. I did have, consulting does play quite a bit of money when you work in corporate America banking. So I
Uh-huh.
had a good salary that came in, and then I also kept my expenses down. So, I had a cheaper apartment than the rest of my colleagues did, paid off car. I didn't go out every single night for dinners and things like that, and just scraped the money together for all of them.
Wow. So what's your portfolio look like now? Can you describe it to us?
Sure. So right now I have 28 doors total, not units, but doors.
Uh-huh.
And it's a mix. The largest I have is a 4 unit right now. The majority of single families, and I have a couple duplexes sprinkled in there as well.
It's fantastic. And that's all since 2016 while working a full-time corporate job.
That is correct. Yep.
That's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive. So where are they? Were they in are they in one location? Are they scattered around the place?
Yeah. So now they're in one location. I used to have some up in Atlanta area, and then I had some down here in St. Simons Island area. Now I've pretty much liquidated my Atlanta properties and pulled the cash out of all of those. Put everything down here in South Georgia, hoping a hurricane doesn't hit here again, like Irma did a few years ago.
Yeah.
But they're all in this area.
Okay. And so what's the what's an average deal? Can you talk us through, purchase price, how much rent you're getting?
Sure. That has changed drastically over probably the past couple of years because everything's more expensive now, of course, like most markets.
Mm-hmm.
But the average single family that I get here, I usually get for anywhere between 80 and 100,000.
Okay.
They usually need about 15 to 20,000 repairs, typically just some updating, nothing major. And then I can turn those around and rent them usually for around 1,300 a month.
Oh, wow. So you're buying for about 90, spending 15 and renting for 1,300. That's really good
Yeah.
cash flow. But again, yeah, like 3-4 years ago, yeah, that was easier to get than it is now. But even 3 years ago, that's still really good. How did you find, 10, 15,000 rehabs? You're right. That's not a particularly big rehab, but it's still, it's not easy either. So how did you find people to put in those appliances and floors and paint and whatever else you were doing? That's not that easy either.
No, that's actually probably the biggest hurdle that I've had to even continuously today overcome. In this area, we do have a shortage of really good contractors and handymen and things like that. So I had my fair share of getting burnt on that. And now I've got, a really good crew that comes in and does these for me. So I don't have to worry about it so much anymore.
So you keep them in a pretty local area where you can have the same, handyman or painter or whatever it might be, deal with your new acquisitions, same person that might have done one a year ago or 2 years ago.
Absolutely. And I try to keep him on pretty much only my acquisitions so that, I can use them full time. It's a small group. And so I try to buy, one property after another so they don't leave me and go to other big projects.
Well, yeah, if you can do that, that's the way to keep good people. That's the only way to keep good people, really, unless they're your close relatives.
Absolutely.
Which isn't the case for most of us. So, I mean, how have you been finding them over the last year? Is it still MLS wholesalers? Are you acquiring them in any other way, foreclosures, or are you doing direct marketing yourself? How's that panned out?
Yeah, I've actually slowed down on the acquisitions the past year or so a little bit, especially with COVID and just kind of the market uncertainty. But I pretty much use wholesalers now. I don't do much on the MLS. There's not a lot out there. There's, occasionally something will pop up, but I get the deals from wholesalers. Word of mouth now. I have people come to me and say, I heard you buy these properties. We're in this type of scenario. Can you take this off of us? So that's really how I find the deals at this point.
Okay, and so is it still generally single families around 90 per door, and then you have a couple of duplexes and triplexes that are broadly similar, maybe a little bit less per door?
Yep, that's right. And then I've also kind of started focusing on a little bit more Section 8 properties as well, just to mitigate the risk that we have with non-payment during pandemics. And those usually go around the $50,000 to $60,000 range and rent for about $800 a piece.
That's pretty impressive. I mean, what are those areas like? Are they, I mean, it sounds like kind of C class, C minus if they're $50,000, $60,000 a door.
Yeah, those are C minus, even some D areas. I spend a lot more time screening and I have a little bit higher vacancy to try to get the right people in there. But, so far so good on those.
And are you self-managing, or are you using one local property manager who's doing all this, tenant supervision and maintenance for you?
So I self-manage them all myself at this point. I've tried to turn them over to property managers several times, but not to talk poorly about the ones here, they're just a little bit less sophisticated in terms of systems and reporting and oversight and things like that. And I found that I can actually do a better job and spend less time doing it myself than managing the property manager.
Wow. Well, what's your secret there? How do you do that without driving yourself mad with phone calls on a Saturday night to go and tell someone how to replace an AC filter or something? How do you talk to us through some of those systems?
I didn't say I wasn't mad, so just putting that out there. What I tried to implement is we do have online property management system where I've asked everyone to submit their work orders through, so that I'm not getting alerts on my phone all the time. However, if it's an absolute emergency, all the tenants have been instructed to call me anytime. So there is the occasional Saturday night, 10 p.m., 11 p.m. contact, but for the most part, they keep it Monday through Friday.
And what do they use to submit those work orders? What software is that?
That's Buildium.
Oh, Buildium. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. And then do you have them paying, how do they pay the rent? Are they paying by ACH? Do you have some, or do you have another app that they pay your rent through?
They are all paid through ACH. I have a couple of, tenants that aren't as comfortable with the technology. And so they just do direct deposits into my bank account and actually take it to the bank. So I don't really have to go pick up checks or deal with any of that kind of old school methodology at all.
And then do you use the same handymen that renovate your new acquisitions? Do they go and, perform usual, fix, leaky sinks or faucets, or you sending those guys around once you get something on Buildium? Are you like calling one of your guys to say, go to 133 Main Street, look at the bathroom sink?
Yeah, so I
But
do have the same crew that'll kind of do most of the routine maintenance type issues. And then I have vendors that handle like HVAC, plumbing, things like that. They usually come out same day. And I do pay a little bit of premium for those guys, but they can get out there quicker than, say, my handyman could, considering, all the issues that can
okay.
occur with 28 units.
So how much time does that take? Because I mean, I might be wrong, but if it's 28 units and there's a lot of kind of C-class stuff in there, I'd imagine you get pestered quite a bit from tenants. And you're in the middle between the tenants and scheduling the repairs, right?
I am. I'm actually working on automating it to where everything goes directly to my handyman and kind of trying to get him trained up on how to respond to certain situations or not respond in
Mm-hmm.
terms of going out there. But for
Mm-hmm.
the meantime, I would probably say during the summer, which are the months we have the most calls, HVAC issues, people doing crazy stuff in their units, that
Yeah.
usually takes me a couple of hours a week at the most. Winter, I have almost no requests down here, so we get hardly anything at that time.
And do you buy a certain property type that might be less maintenance heavy? Like, are you avoiding really old houses or avoiding frame build houses or, anything like
No,
that?
I'll take the old houses and then I'll renovate them. If they're really old and they have, say, copper plumbing, we'll, before we put a tenant in there, we'll bust out the floors, take out the copper. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
we've changed out the wiring. We try to do everything we can to make them kind of newer properties, even if they're old, to try to
Mm-hmm.
mitigate some of that, but it's still going to happen occasionally.
Yeah. Okay. And so what tools do you use to gather the information, like the income and expenses for those properties? Is that something that you monitor every month, or do you use Buildium for that too?
I do. I use Buildium for that. I actually just started doing that through Buildium this year. Prior to this year, it was old school spreadsheets.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I do monitor the performance through Buildium in terms of occupancy levels, how much we're spending on repairs, if there's certain units. We do trending too to see if there's certain units or certain tenants that are, calling in more often, things like that.
Okay. And you mentioned that you've slowed down a little bit in the last year due to the market uncertainty. So what's your, I mean, let's say back in 2019, what was your goal in building that portfolio? Did you have a number in mind? Did you want to get to a certain number of units or a certain amount of money per month? And has that changed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've never set a certain amount of units because I look more at what the cash flow is going to be. Most of
Mm-hmm.
my deals are cash flow related, not appreciation and not just numbers in terms of number of units. So I had a financial freedom number, which I did hit in 2019 to say, okay, I need to replace my W-2 income. This is where I need to be at to do that. And
Okay.
luckily I did hit that in
Brilliant.
2019. Didn't quit work, even though I said I would. But hit that number. And right now, I'm actually doing a couple of flips as opposed to acquiring long-term buy and holds. And I don't plan on doing anything else probably for the next 6 or 7 months. I'm going to kind of just stack up cash and hold on to that to see what happens with foreclosures.
Okay. And so let me ask you, but that's amazing that you got to your financial freedom number in, sounds like in 3 years. I mean, obviously
Mm-hmm.
you were earning good money, but you were clearly extremely busy putting it to work and building that portfolio. I mean, did you have all those mortgages? Are you paying them on 30-year schedules, or did you shorten that to 15 or 20 years so that you'd have them paid off quicker? What was your plan there?
That is a great question. I've actually done several refinances on many of the properties that have appreciated and pulled more cash back out. So that's
Okay.
kind of one way I've continued acquiring in 2019, especially.
Uh-huh.
Recently, I actually rolled the majority, not all, but the majority of my properties into one large commercial loan. Took them out of their 30-year mortgages. That way I can open myself up for 10 more Fannie Freddie loans to come through. So
Oh, so the commercial loan, is that, obviously that's a shorter, is it a balloon? I mean, is that a 10-year term or 20-year term? What's that look like?
it's a 20-year term with, unfortunately, a 5-year reset on the interest rate. So there is some risk related to that. I do still have a lot of equity in those properties, so I didn't
Hmm.
completely max that out, but we did pull a little bit back out to be able to acquire some more.
Okay. So what do you like to average per, do you have a number? Is it like 200 per door that you like to have after mortgage and other expenses?
It has to be at least 300 a door. I won't do it.
Okay. And that's even after the refi, you still have to be doing 300 a door, or you won't do the refi?
Absolutely. Most of mine are around 500-600 a door. When I do the refi, we bring it down to about 300, but it just varies per property.
Okay. And do you have CapEx for all of the roofs and ACs that are going to be replaced for those 28 units over the next, 5, 10, 15 years?
Yep, absolutely. So when I first started, I was being, extremely conservative, and I was saving about 10% per month for CapEx, and then about
Uh-huh.
8% for repairs. What I found is if I go ahead and replace a lot of those things at that initial renovation, when I buy these properties, I don't have to reserve as much for CapEx. So now I actually only do about 5%, but I keep
Mm-hmm.
the 8% for repairs every month because I do have a high number of that just due to the types of properties I have.
Okay, and just this is, do you the 5% you're taking out for capex? Do you have that in a separate bank account that you're not so that you're not tempted to use it to buy another
Absolutely.
property?
Absolutely. Because I would. If I kept it in my
Yeah,
operating account, I would use it, no doubt.
yeah, and I know the temptation's there. You see a big number in an operating account, you see a property hitting your inbox, you're like, oh, I'll buy it. But
Yes.
if it's not there, you
It's a
have to
compulsion
save
once you
more.
start investing. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's it. So you're doing flips at the minute, and how you? So that, I mean, it's not an easy time to be a flipper right now with inventory so low and profit margins are not as I mean, they were never that fat, but they're thinner than they used to be with so many people kind of competing. Are you just getting them from wholesalers, fixing them up, listing them on the MLS to kind of end users, owner occupiers, that kind of thing?
That's exactly right. So we knew going into these couple flips we're doing now that we needed to sell them to be able to profit off of them. For these particular ones, I am using some other people's money. So I have some friends that are investors in these flips. They're funding most of them.
Okay.
And we are going to be listing them and selling them. And I have my business partner actually does the repairs and all the contracting work on it. And we just do a 50-50 split on that. However, just because of how crazy the market's been the last few months, when we acquired them, we also looked at, potentially refinancing them to pull the cash out if they don't sell for what we expected to make sure
Hmm.
that we could still rent them and make money on them. So that's kind of the backup plan if they didn't sell for some reason.
And so you mentioned you were getting them funded by outside investors. So were they it sounds like they weren't just a typical loan at a fixed interest rate. Were they more partners that were sharing in the profits from the flip, or was it just a typical hard money loan?
Yeah, so it was a typical hard money loan, but we had a very, very low interest rate because it's people that I know personally that just had their money sitting in a savings account. They weren't
Nice.
super sophisticated investors yet, but they had the money. So, they were willing to loan 50, 100,000 for 2, 3,000 just to hold it for a couple of months.
That's
Um,
perfect. And did you just
yeah,
secure that with a first mortgage recorded locally?
just a unsecured note, actually. They agreed to do
Oh
it that way.
wow.
Yeah,
That's proper friends and family money.
that is.
Yeah. That's even easier. Yeah, not too many people would have access to that. But even having access to private money with a mortgage is still fantastic because hard money
Absolutely.
loans were generally double-digit interest rates, points, huge amounts of red tape. So any would-be flippers out there, once you have a little bit of a track record of buying and selling or buying and holding or buying and flipping, you can kind of approach colleagues or clients and
Hmm.
saying, well, if you can do it for 7 or 8% or 9% interest without any of the red tape and bureaucracy, that's a lot easier. I did hundreds of flips with private money, and the good thing
Hmm.
about it is you can use the same line again and again. If you have some nice old people, generally older people that have a lot of experience buying rentals but don't want to hold anymore, but they're happy to put their money to work for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. It can be a
Absolutely.
win-win if the partnership is set up right at the beginning. So yeah, I'd
Absolutely.
encourage people to check it out. So that's okay. So that's, you got some flips going on. Your rentals are tipping away. It sounds like you're in a wait and see mode for COVID. What's your take on all this? What do you think is going to happen when foreclosures start again? Or obviously the real estate's been on the up and up for the last 5-6 months, which I didn't personally see being at this point at the end of August. But
Hmm.
where do you think we're going here?
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. I've almost been thinking for 2 years now something was going to happen, right? It just
Hmm.
it's never done the correction really. So I think just looking, being in the mortgage industry for the past few years up until July, looking at the numbers, there's almost no way that you're not going to see an increase in foreclosures over the next few months, even if it starts next year. And so people are going to start defaulting on these mortgages. They're not going to be able to refinance. They're not going to be able to do new purchases because they've had forbearances and things like that. So I think there is going to be an opportunity to start, kind of getting some of these. I don't know if it's going to be anywhere near as massive as '08. I don't think it will be. But I do think there's going to be opportunity. And to your point, right now, at least in our market here, there's bidding wars on almost every property, whether it's an investment type property, owner occupied. It's not the best time to buy because you're paying a premium. And my hope is that sometime early in Q1, Q2, that we start seeing these foreclosures and prices going down, and I can scoop up a little bit more at that time.
Just because that'll increase the inventory of homes on the market, which is very low at the moment? Or is it a mixture of increased inventory and I mean, do you see unemployment increasing again? Or because that's recovered quite well. I mean, still a lot of people out of work, but it's, seems to be on the right track.
It does definitely seem to be on the right track. Unfortunately, the pandemic, I'm not an epidemiologist or an expert in that area. So I don't know what to expect around that, come winter when people start getting in closed areas again. But, if things start happening, the government, stalls and kind of drags their feet like they're doing right now with the next stimulus, we could very well start seeing some unemployment shoot up again.
It's hard to predict what's going to happen when the government can kind of throw $1 trillion into the market from one weekend to another, and your economic models just go out the door when somebody throws a tidal wave of cash at everything.
Absolutely.
So I would agree with you. It's hard to predict. I do think there will be increased foreclosures in every market, but I mean, Florida is a judicial state, which means they get processed slowly through the court system. You can't just go from 10 a month to 200 a month. They don't get processed. So I think it's going to be a slow burn for a while. And it was the last time too, even though the banks had huge equity issues, which you don't have now. It still took years for all those foreclosures and REOs to get through the market before it bottomed out.
Absolutely. And that's why I had a job in foreclosures for 3 years, but Georgia's a little bit faster. We're non-judicial here, and I don't have, even though I'm very close to you in Florida, we don't have any properties there as of yet. So, my hope is we can get some of those through the system faster if need be. Not to be insensitive to people, I want people to keep their homes, but if the opportunity is there and you can help people, so be it.
Sure. And have you thought about, teaching yourself how to buy properties in foreclosure auctions? If you think there's going to be more of them coming, is that something you're...
Absolutely. And so just working in the foreclosure industry for so long, for so many years, I'm very familiar with the process. We process them in the state of Georgia, but I actually haven't bought one myself. So I'm looking forward to kind of getting out there and starting to do that soon.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I've bought a couple of hundred in the foreclosure auctions and I really miss it. That was my bread and butter. So I'm looking forward to that coming back, and I'm eagerly awaiting it. And I'm even looking at, teaching some people how to do it. I think there's going to be a lot of demand out there for other people that are going to want to learn how to purchase in foreclosures, people that have been sitting on cash or maybe were wholesalers for a few years and want to add another string to their bow. So yeah, watch this space. Let's see how it pans out. So now that you've had your financial freedom goal and you're still very young, so it's really impressive. What's your goal now? What's your goal for the next 3 years in financially and just general lifestyle and career?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've been thinking a lot about that lately. So my husband and I are expecting our first little one early next year. So I will say, thank you. I will say some of my goals have kind of slowed down for the next few months. And I'm going to have to recalibrate those a little bit. But what I've realized is that, that wonderful financial freedom number isn't as high as I want it to be. So, I'm going to look at probably doubling that number over the next 2 to 3 years, maybe less than that, just to be able to have a little bit more lifestyle choices than we do now.
It's I know it's because your number when you do your financial freedom number without kids and with kids is it's completely different.
Sure is.
I have 2 kids, and if I didn't have them, I'd be living the life of Riley with my passive income, but I'm not.
I completely understand. And we never planned on having kids. So this was a little bit of an interesting twist in life, but you go with the punches, right? I
like the way you're going to recalibrate your financial freedom number, which is just multiply it by something and you'll be getting there,
Yep,
but that's
precisely.
It's awesome that you have the flexibility, that you have a strong income stream and you have flexibility to do what you want in terms of your investing or in terms of your first year or two with the baby. You're not under pressure.
Exactly.
Like a lot of moms are to go back to work like literally weeks later, which as a
even
European,
though I want to.
Even though you want to, but as a European, it's always difficult to accept how short maternity is over here compared to, Ireland, England, Spain, France, where moms are out 4-6 months and it's completely normal.
Absolutely.
People are organized for it. So, but you have the flexibility and you're at a job where you can work at home anyway. It's not like you have to suit up and drive 40 minutes to an office. You can be checking out deals from your home office. you know?
Yep, exactly.
So tell me, so what advice do you have for other newbie investors who want to take that initial plunge? Maybe some people that have been reading about it and now they're a bit nervous with the pandemic. What advice do you have for people to get started and run with it?
Yeah, a couple things, and mostly because I've made probably every mistake you can just by jumping in, sometimes too fast, frankly. But, the number one thing for me personally was don't get stuck in analysis paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
I've met lots of investors who've spent 2 and 3 years reading everything they can and they just don't make a move. And you're wasting valuable years in your life of compounding returns to not do something. Um,
Yeah.
so, do something. It's more risky not to do something than to just, sit there and analyze everything.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of to back that up a little bit would be when you do get ready to do something, find someone who has more experience than you and run your thoughts by them and what you're looking at doing by them.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten some pretty valuable information from people that have even had 2-3 years more experience than I do. So don't jump in completely blind on it, but make a move. Don't sit there forever.
That's really good advice. So who was your sounding board or your kind of mentor for your first, few doors to kind of make sure you weren't doing anything crazy?
Yeah, it was really intelligent of me because I had very random people on the Bigger Pockets forums giving me advice, and I'm sure some of them probably didn't have any experience. So I didn't heed my own advice at the time. But now I'm in a group called GoBundance. I don't know if you've heard of them.
I have heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm in that group, and I have a group of really strong women that a lot of them are investors themselves. And so if I have any big deals or anything I'm considering, I run things by them.
That's really smart. That's really good advice. And like you said, there nowadays with the tools that are out there, there's you can absolutely find somebody willing to help you or willing to give you some general tips and advice or even specific ones. And I like your idea about the analysis paralysis. That is a very common problem, and there's too many people that are spending way too much time in front of a computer screen and way too little time actually out in the field, just looking at stuff and
Yes.
talking to people and walking through scruffy houses and just kind of getting, you need to get out there and literally feel the product that you're trying to buy a little bit. And
Yep.
so, yeah, battle your way through that. And like you say, take the plunge, but get some advice while you're doing it. So there's really no excuses there if you can.
No, not at all.
And you like you say, you've made plenty of mistakes. Anybody that's done anything has made mistakes. Anybody that's bought 20 something units has made mistakes. There's no other way of buying 20 something units. So what's just inevitable, right? Make sure you have the reserves while you're doing it. Make sure you have a healthy attitude to risk and a bit of a sense of humor, and I don't know, bottle of wine close by after a tough week, whatever you need to do, just do it.
Absolutely. You touched on all the good points. And the other thing to mention too is, as I've made these mistakes with almost every deal, there's something I could have done better. I keep a checklist and try to systematize my acquisitions. And so every deal I do, I'm adding something else that I didn't think of the last time to make sure I check or look into before I make the purchase.
Can you think of a couple of important ones that you made and learned to avoid afterwards?
I can tell you a dozen. Probably the couple of biggest mistakes I've made. I purchased a quadplex during hurricane season down here in South Georgia. And the quadplex, I wasn't smart enough at the time to realize to look at the elevation. And it was in between two buildings that were raised very high. I purchased it. Hurricane Irma hit the day I purchased it and flooded out the entire complex. It was not in a flood zone, no flood insurance. So that's one of the things I learned is, look at the elevation before you make purchases.
And good luck getting insurance on a purchase if you're closing with a hurricane approaching. You're not going to get it.
Now, I learned that you can transfer the existing owner's policy potentially, but that's really your only option, and that doesn't always work either.
Okay, so you're paying closer attention to that's a hard lesson, getting something flooded the day you bought it. Goodness, was there people living there?
There were. I had 4 tenants. All the units were occupied, and I was actually in Turkey on vacation at the time, and so they started, sending me photos of the apartments flooding.
Yeah. Okay. So now what do? You get elevation certs. You do avoid flood zones, or just get flood insurance?
I have no problem buying in a flood zone. I just get flood insurance and make sure that it's not the lowest lying property in that neighborhood or area before I purchase it.
Yeah, not in a bowl between two buildings. Yeah,
precisely.
And can you think of one more thing that people might be able to learn from?
Sure. My first few purchases were, properties that were built in the 90s and 2000s. So it's not something I had to even think about. But then when I started buying properties that were built in the 50s and 60s, I would have an inspector come out, of course, but, they'd never note that it was copper piping underneath the home. And so I had two back to back. I sometimes have to do things 2 or 3 times to learn, but two back to back that the copper pipes just, completely corroded right when we started turning the water on. And I had renovations done on those properties and then had to bust the floors out and redo the renovations entirely to replace all the copper in the house. So make sure you get that checked out, or just go ahead and replace it with PVC before you, remodel or put renters in there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's nothing worse than renovating a house and then having to unrenovate it to rip out stuff you installed to fix something you could have done at the beginning. That's one of the most hardest lessons anybody's going to have to learn.
And a basic one. It's a pretty basic
advice.
thing. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's basic once you've experienced it a couple of times. It's not something that just occurs to someone naturally when they're walking through a house. You don't normally think about what pipes are made of, and that's
true.
A very common lesson people learn. But if you can avoid it, better, But I've made the same mistake. So you mentioned earlier, I think, that you were in the mortgage industry up until last month. So what are you doing now? It sounds like you've made a change.
I have. So I was lucky enough to come on board as the chief operating officer for Keith Weinhold at Get Rich Education. So now I'm helping run his operations and kind of expand that business and find new guests for the podcast and all that fun stuff.
That's awesome. So this is one of the guys you latched, that was one of your early kind of inspirations for getting into real estate, and now you're working with him, helping to do the same for others.
Absolutely. Yes, it was very exciting, and I thought it was kind of a long shot to work for him, but it's been a good ride for the last couple of months.
That's brilliant, and I love that you're in you're in Georgia, and Keith is in Alaska, if I'm not mistaken. So it's so cool that you can have these jobs from with this, like the business, the podcast, the websites. It's all online anyway, right? It's not like you have to meet Keith in an office on Monday morning or anything.
That is right. We've never met in person to this date, and hopefully one day we will, but Zoom calls are key right now.
Well, you're both good travelers, I guess. So I guess you will meet once you're. What's your take on traveling? Is that something you're going to start doing again, or well, I guess not if you're expecting, right? You're going to have to wait a bit.
Yeah, no, I'd like to get a little baby passport as soon as possible, and get our little one back on a plane. But as soon as things start opening up, especially back in Europe and Asia, we're going to be on a plane traveling. So
yeah, no, we're the same. We used to travel to Europe a few times a year. My wife is from Madrid, Spain, so we love getting back there, and it would be great to get back again later in the year. Let's see how it goes. So look, when you're not working with Keith or investing in single and multi-families, what are your hobbies? What else do you enjoy doing?
Yeah, so I do a lot of reading, which is probably how I, somewhat got to where I am now. I also spend a lot of time working with animal rescues and animals in general. Big heart for those, and do a lot of fostering and donations and, physical assistance to animals as well. So that's a lot of my time.
Awesome. So what books are you reading at the minute, or what books have you read recently that you could recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now it's mostly child and parenting related books, because I don't know much about kids, but related to real estate and business. One of the recent books I read that I really love is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg.
Okay.
It's excellent. It talks about implementing, certain skills that form habits, which is directly relatable to investing and business. The other one that I really like is Life on Air by Steve Cook. And so me personally, I struggle with learning to take a step back and actually enjoying life and not working all the time. And this book just kind of talks about, hitting financial freedom and what that means, and, how to make your life a little bit more joyful and do things you want rather than working all the time and just making more money.
They seem like two. I'm going to check out those books. They seem like two thought-provoking books. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. So how can people contact you, Aundrea? I mean, some of our listeners might like to reach out and get some advice from all the great things you've been doing these last few years. What's the best way?
Yeah, I'd love for someone to reach out. So a couple different ways. If you want to email me, it's Aundrea@getricheducation.com, and that's spelled AUNDREA at getricheducation.com. Bigger Pockets also. I'm on there quite frequently.
Okay. Well, I'll put those in the show notes, and I'll make sure people have access to them, and I'll put the links to those books in the show notes as well.
Perfect.
But yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Andrea. Thanks very much for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me on, Colin. Nice meeting you.
You too. You take care.
You as well.
There you go, folks. That was Aundrea Newbern from the Get Rich Education podcast, which is a great show, by the way. If you haven't heard Keith Weinholz's show, definitely recommend you check that out. I've been on it a couple of times and was honored to have done so. So yeah, what an impressive lady, right? She is one hard-working person. To try to have a busy corporate job, to be earning a good salary in a corporate job, you got to work your ass off, and just to have the time to buy all of those properties, and not just buy them, but actually self-managing them, getting a lot of them renovated. Because it's one thing buying a turnkey kind of property or buying a renovated property, and I've sold a lot of renovated properties to busy people over the years, but kind of buying stuff that needs work, organizing the work, getting the tenant in there, managing all of that process, and building that up to 20 something doors while working a corporate job, that takes a hell of a lot of effort. But again, if you're willing to put in those hours and willing to put in that work, you've seen what can be achieved. I mean, she went from 2016 to having no passive income to having her financial freedom number just 3 years later. And, yes, she was in a good position to have a lot of money to invest. But, unlike a lot of people in her position, she was living in a regular apartment, driving regular paid off cars, living below her means, and kind of saving and investing money towards a goal. And, within a few years, she could be doing anything she wanted, traveling the world with her family, working on the podcast remotely, managing her crews and her properties remotely. I mean, she's got a huge amount of options that people kind of working for big corporations might not necessarily have. So it just kind of goes to show how much freedom real estate can give if it's done properly with a goal in mind. And as you heard from Aundrea, she's doesn't mind making mistakes. I mean, she learned from them. Anybody who makes expensive mistakes is going to learn from them, but it's not something you should ever let prevent you from getting started in the first place. It's just an inevitable consequence of taking action. But you generally make more money than the mistakes you make. People rarely regret taking action. They mostly regret not taking action. So I would encourage anybody who's kind of reading and never getting anything done. I mean, try and pivot towards doing something, taking a goal. I've always had that mindset, and I'm kind of determined to kind of help people accelerate their real estate journeys. If you think I can help you, just go to colinvestments.com. That's colinvestments.com. You'll see reports, podcasts, videos. You'll be able to schedule consultations with me to have a chat about what we might be able to do for you. So go and do that. Check it out. I'm happy to talk. And as always, I appreciate your interest in this podcast. I hope you're enjoying it. And if you haven't done so, please by all means give me a rating or a review, whether that's in iTunes or Google or Spotify or wherever you're listening. That helps a lot get the word out there. Really appreciate it. And I shall be back next Thursday morning with the following episode. Thanks again. This is Colin Murphy signing out. You guys take care, stay safe, stay connected, and keep working. Bye-bye.